It was a dark winter evening, the kind where the cold bites at your skin and the silence of the night seems to echo around you. The time was December, a month that always seemed to carry a sense of heaviness, both in the air and in my heart. I had just turned 18, a time when life feels like it's full of possibility. Yet for me, it felt like I was standing still, stuck in a relationship that lacked any real communication, at least not from my end. My boyfriend and I had been fighting for days, the tension between us building until it finally erupted that evening. Tears were shed, words were thrown, and nothing was resolved. I felt the overwhelming weight of it all, so I decided to step out for a while to clear my head. I lived on the back roads of a small village where the world felt far away, a place where quiet soul tide was the norm. The roads near my house were poorly lit, with only small patches of grass and uneven paths on the side of the road to walk on. No sidewalks, no streetlights, just the cold, dark expanse of winter stretching out ahead of me. It wasn't the safest of places to be out walking, especially not as a young woman alone, but in that moment, I wasn't thinking clearly. I just needed to escape the heaviness of the argument, even if it meant venturing out into the pitch black night. The time was around 6 p.m., and the darkness had already consumed the sky. I walked on, my footsteps the only sound in the stillness of the evening. It was a foolish choice for an 18-year-old girl, but in my emotional haze, I didn't care. I made my way towards the motorway bridge that crossed over a busy highway where I often found solace in the sound of cars rushing by. It was quiet, away from the noise of the village. There was a homeless shelter near the bridge, but I'd never had any real issues there. Just the occasional encounter with a drunk man who was usually too out of it to even notice me. But tonight was different. As I reached the top of the bridge, I paused, looking out for the cars below, wondering where they were all headed. My mind wandered aimlessly, lost in my own thoughts, when suddenly I felt something. At first it was subtle, a presence behind me, but then it grew unmistakable. Hands wrapped tightly around my waist, and a chill ran down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me, the naive part, wanted to believe it was my boyfriend who had come to find me to apologize, but deep down, I knew it wasn't him. The man behind me pressed up against me, his body too close, too forceful. Before I could even react, he spun me around aggressively, turning me toward his friend. The shock hit me all at once. Both men were in their 30s, unshaven, dressed in baggy clothes, their shopping bags clinking with each movement. One spoke in Polish and the other in broken English, both laughing in a way that made my skin crawl. Their words smelled of cigarettes, their breath sour. I was paralyzed. It was as if my body had betrayed me, my stress response, fight or flight, frozen in place. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. They commented on my hair and my eyes, though it was so dark that I was sure they couldn't see either clearly. They bombarded me with questions. What's your name? Where do you live? What are you doing out here all alone? My mind screamed to run, to shout, but my body refused to cooperate. All I could do was answer them, trying desperately to mask the fear that was making my insides twist. The man behind me tightened his grip, his body pressing even closer, and I could feel something. Something I never wanted to feel. The realization of what they might be planning hit me like a cold wave. I needed to get away, but how? I was alone. No one was around. The bridge was empty, the highway below a distant roar. The shelter was close by, but I knew I couldn't count on anyone there. Instinct kicked in and I lied. Told them I was 16, hoping the age would deter them. It felt wrong, but it was the only thing I could think of in the moment. I told them my boyfriend was coming to meet me, that he was waiting for me on the bridge. It was a white lie, a desperate attempt to make them think I was not as alone as I truly was. They hesitated for a moment, the man behind me loosening his grip just enough for me to take a breath. But they didn't leave. They kept asking questions, their tone shifting as they seemed to size me up. The fear inside me grew, but something in the back of my mind told me to keep calm, to keep them talking. Slowly, they released me entirely. The man stepped back, and I didn't waste a second. I ran. No, I sprinted as fast as I could across the bridge, away from them, toward the other side. I didn't look back. My legs burnt with effort, but I didn't stop until I was across, until I was out of their reach. I found a bench near the village, collapsing into it, shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop the sobs that racked my body. A few people walked by, but not a single one stopped to check on me. My heart was still racing in my chest as I dialed my boyfriend's number, my voice barely a whisper. He came to meet me halfway, walking me home the rest of the way. His presence the only comfort I had in that moment. I will never forget that night, the fear, the cold, the feeling of being so completely alone. And to this day, I have not crossed that bridge again. No matter how bright the street lights may shine, no matter how safe it might seem, I refuse to walk that path. The memory is too strong, too vivid. To these two men on the bridge, I hope we never meet again. I've shared this story with a few friends, and they urged me to tell it, so here it goes. It happened about a week before Christmas. I'm a 32-year-old guy currently attending college using my GI Bill in a city located in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm juggling school and work, so I don't have much time to go out and meet people in person, which means I've been relying a lot on dating apps. One evening, I matched with a really cute girl around my age, and we hit it off. Our conversation was easy and natural, and after chatting for a while, we decided to meet up for a date. The location was a bar and restaurant that wasn't too far for either of us to drive, so it seemed perfect. When I met her in person, I was even more impressed. She was gorgeous, and we got along great. We spent the evening talking, and during our conversation, I learned some things about her. She worked in a non-cop role at the police station, something like a receptionist. She also told me that she had a roommate who was out of town for the holidays and that she hated being alone because of a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. To be honest, hearing that made me feel uneasy, but she reassured me that he was harmless, so I let it slide. We had a few more drinks, and after an hour or so, she suggested we go back to her place. Honestly, I wasn't going to argue. She was attractive, and I thought we were having a great time. Then she insisted on driving. I told her I was fine to drive since I'd only had 2 gin and tonics, but she insisted again, saying she'd seen too many DUIs in her line of work. I thought it was a little odd, but didn't make a big deal of it. We got into her car and drove to her place, which wasn't far. When we got there, she walked right up to the door and opened it. The door wasn't locked, which I thought was strange considering she had mentioned having a stalker and that her roommate wasn't home. She didn't seem concerned about it, though, so I didn't say anything. She started feeding her cat, and as she did, I noticed a bowl of cereal sitting on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it had been there for a while, but not long enough for the cereal to get soggy. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated before saying it was hers, that she'd eaten it as a snack before heading to the bar. It didn't make sense, but before I could question it further, she kissed me and wrapped her arms around me, asking me to take her to her room. I didn't think twice and followed her to the bedroom. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, but she stopped me, telling me to leave them open. A few minutes later, I was lying in bed with my back to the window when I heard her gasp. This wasn't a playful gasp, it was one of real fear. Her eyes were locked on the window. I turned around just in time to see someone in a hoodie standing outside. They ran off, and I heard the steps pounding on the back deck. I immediately jumped up, my heart racing, and ran to check the doors. Of course, the front door wasn't locked. I locked it as quickly as I could, but as soon as I did, the door started banging. I ran back to the bedroom to tell her, but she just told me to come back to bed. I snapped at her, demanding to know if she was insane. I asked if she knew that was her ex, and she casually confirmed it, saying not to worry about it and that he'd leave soon. The banging continued, now on the side of the house, and she seemed completely unfazed by it. In fact, she kept trying to get me to come back into bed like nothing was happening. I was terrified. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I knew, this guy could be a cop himself, or she could know someone who would take her side. And I couldn't leave either because my car was still at the bar and I had no way to get there. At this point, I was in full panic mode, and I started calling her out for everything. The unlocked door, the weird cereal, the lies she was telling. I straight up called her a liar, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was in some kind of setup. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I was done. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I told her, if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I'll kill you both. I wasn't trying to sound tough, but at that point I was scared and angry and needed to make sure she knew I wasn't backing down. I ordered an Uber on my phone without telling her. I stayed near the door, hoping to keep her talking and keep myself close to an escape route. Fortunately, I never took my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were by the door. When the Uber arrived, I didn't say a word. I just opened the door and ran as fast as I could. I looked back once to see her standing there staring at me, and I didn't look again. It's been a little over a month since that night, and I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly avoided something really bad. I don't believe her story about the crazy ex anymore. The whole situation feels off. Like I was either walking into a robbery or some kind of twisted setup. I still don't know what to think about it, but I'm definitely mad at myself. I'm a 9-year Navy vet, and I let myself get dragged into something like that. I reported her Uber account on the way back to the bar, and I told the bartender about it too in case she ever came back. I don't know what her deal was, but I never want to be in a situation like that again.